Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharyam Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om Parameshvara. Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. This is recording okay. And good. Nice to see you all this morning. We continue our study, and also welcome to everyone watching online. We continue our study of Chapter 8 today. We'll begin with some recitation, beginning with verse 5. And as always, be sure you read the translation while I'm chanting, and then repeat after me. Antakale cha mam heva, antakale cha mam heva, smaran muktva kalevaram, smaran muktva kalevaram, yah prayati samadbhavam, yah prayati samad, yati nastyatra samshayaha, yasti Yatra samshayaha. Oops. That's not working. Let me make sure that's set properly. There we go. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam. Tyajatyante kalevaram. Tyajatyante kalevaram. Tam tamevaiti kaunteya, tam tamevaiti kaunte, sada tadbhava bhavitaha, sada tadbhava bhavitaha, tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, tasmat sarveshu kal. Mamanusmara yudhyacha, Mamanusmara yudhyacha, Mayarpita mano buddhir, Mayarpita mano buddhir, Mame vaishyasya samshayaha, Mame vaishyasya samshayaha, Abhyasa yoga yuktena, Abhyasa yoga yukte, Chetasananyagamina, Chetasananyagamina, Paramam purusham divyam, Paramam purusham divyam, Yati partanu chintayan, Yati partanu chint. We have a change of meter here. Kavim Purana Manushasitaram, Kavim Purana Manushasitaram, Anoraniyan Samanusmaretyaha, Anoraniyam Samanusmaretyaha, Sarvasya Dhataram Achintya Rupam, Sarvasya Dhataram Achintya Rupam, Aditya Varnam Tamasah Parastat, Aditya Varna Tamasah Parastat, Prayana Kale Manasachalena, prayana kale manasachalena bhaktya yukto yoga balena chaiva bhaktya yukto yoga balena chaiva Bhruvor madhye pranamavesha samyaka Bhruvor madhye pranamavesha Satam param purushamupaiti divyam Satam param purushamupaiti divyam. Very dramatic when it changes meter. And we'll discuss why that's so and why that particular place he changed meter. All right. So we are at the beginning of chapter 8, called Akshara Brahma Yoga, but its main topic deals with death, and in particular a particular kind of meditation that one can engage in at the time of death. And all of that is prompted by Arjuna's. Arjuna had several questions he asked at the outset. The last of those questions was for one who meditates on Sri Krishna at the end of life, for that meditator, where do they go? What is the result of that kind of meditation? And in our prior class, we discussed how, in fact, coming back, in his verse 6, we discussed the overly simplistic interpretation of this verse 6. Whatever is meditated upon, one casting off one's body at death, one reaches that, O Arjuna, being constantly absorbed in it. And the verb used is smaran, meditate. Smaran literally means remembering. Smarana is memory. Smriti also means memory. Smr is the verbal root to remember. And based on that verbal root, many people give a very, as I suggested last week, an overly simplistic interpretation of this verse to suggest that smaret, whatever you happen to remember, your very last thought that you remember before passing away, that determines where you travel in your next life. And there are several problems with that interpretation. The main problem being that it's out of context. The root to remember here is used in this chapter, in chapter 8. Sri Krishna uses this verb many times in a sense of to meditate. Notice how the verse ends, being constantly absorbed in it. That's not a mere memory. He's talking about meditation. So whatever you meditate on at the end of your life might have some effect in where you go after this life, but whatever you happen to accidentally remember my dung beetle example from last week, whatever you happen to remember at the end of your life, that's not at all what Sri Krishna says here. He says very clearly what you meditate upon. Now, based on that, there was one question, and that is, there's a story. I'm not even familiar with the story. It's in the Bhagavata Purana. I haven't studied the Purana very thoroughly. There was a Rishi, Bharat, who apparently was very much attached to a particular deer. Some of you may know this story. I don't know it, honestly. And according to the Bhagavata Purana, this Rishi Bharat was reborn as a deer in his next life. Okay, possible. Absolutely possible. What Sri Krishna is saying here doesn't exclude that possibility, but it doesn't make it a rule. But you know the principle. Pointing out one example doesn't make it a rule. One example is one example. You can't generalize from one example into an overall rule. That violates, actually in logic, especially in Indian logic, there's a lot of discussion about rule and exception. And the exception doesn't override the rule. So here, the rule is meditating on something at the end of your life has an effect. The exception can be a memory of something at the end of your life. Okay. There were also several questions on karma, because we had a discussion about karma in the last. Instead of going into details now answering those questions, I would invite you, if you have any questions on the doctrine of karma, I have a series of 3 videos on the doctrine of karma. If you go through those 3 videos, I think your questions will be answered. Okay. Now, with that in mind, we can proceed. We just began. It is verse 7. We'll return to it now. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, mamanusmara yudhyacha, mamanusmara yudhyacha, mayarpitamano buddhir, mayarpitamano buddhir, mame vaishyasya samshayaha, mame vaishyasya samshayaha. We saw the first part of this verse. Tasmat, therefore, Arjuna, sarveshu kaleshu, at all times, mam anusmara. Manusmara, as we said, we can take it in the literal root sense of remember, or as you're going to see in the very next verse, Sri Krishna starts using that same word in the sense of to meditate. So it can have both meanings. Actually, not in the next verse, 2 verses more. So you can take it in both ways. You can take it, remember me, anusmara, mam, remember me, or meditate on me. Both meanings are there. And here's something that we often forget. Verses don't necessarily have one and only one proper interpretation. There are many commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, and in those many commentaries, you'll find multiple interpretations. Now you might say, but which one is right? Any interpretation, this is something we don't think about. Any interpretation that is consistent with the scripture, consistent with the tradition, and helpful to you, that interpretation can be considered correct. Notice the 3 conditions. One is it should be a proper interpretation in the context of the scripture. Second, it should be a proper interpretation in the context of the whole teaching tradition, in our case, the tradition of Advaita Vedanta. And the third aspect, which is all 3 of these are equally important, the third one is it should be a helpful interpretation. It shouldn't be an unhelpful interpretation. So maybe we have to give up this notion that there is one correct interpretation. Then if you say, but what did Sri Krishna really mean? You'd have to ask him. And we don't have the freedom to ask him, which is why we rely on commentaries. So the commentators can have multiple interpretations, multiple correct interpretations. In fact, many times the commentator will go on and on and on, and then he'll say, yadiva, or he introduces another interpretation, yadiva, or you could interpret it like this. So the same commentator can give multiple interpretations. Here, I think it's important, before we proceed in the chapter, I think we have to understand that Sri Krishna actually had 2 different things in mind in this chapter, 2 different perspectives. Let's finish the verse, and then I want to give you these 2 perspectives because I think it's crucial to understanding this chapter. So the first half he says, O Arjuna, ma manusmara, You should remember me at all times. You should think of me at all times. You should meditate on me at all times. Yudhyacha, and you should fight. Remembering me at all times, O Arjuna, yudhyacha, you should go out on that battlefield fighting, which means we shouldn't. There's a general principle here, and that is, Sri Krishna says, at all times. Not just when should you pray, remember Ishvara, or meditate on Ishvara? Should you do it only those 10 minutes in the morning when you have some prayer and meditation? Sri Krishna says, sarveshu kaleshu, at all times. Kind of hinting back to the main topic he taught way back in chapters 3 and 4, Karma Yoga, and 2. Karma Yoga. Remember our discussions on Karma Yoga? We said Karma Yoga was a way to live a life of full-time spiritual practice by changing your attitude towards your day-to-day activities, so that while you're engaged in your day-to-day activities, you continue to remember Ishvara, and your day-to-day activities are thereby transformed into a sadhana, a spiritual practice. And we said there are many ways to do that. One way would be being grateful for whatever happens to you during the day, little prayers of gratitude, whatever happens during the day, you can say a prayer of gratitude. Or Sri Krishna teaches at length having the attitude of Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, the attitude that whatever comes to you in the course of your day, all of that comes from Ishvara, comes from the hands of Ishvara. So you are constantly in a relationship with Ishvara throughout the day. And this is, I don't want to go back and start teaching everything that we've studied in great detail, but here Sri Krishna absolutely refers to what he taught before, because he's talking about a kind of, he says, Mam anusmara yudhyacha, remember me while you're on the battlefield. Obviously, while you're fighting the war, you can't do a formal kind of meditation, but you certainly can have the attitude of karma yoga even while on a battlefield. How? By recognizing that Ishvara has empowered you with so many skills to fight on that battlefield. So with that sense of confidence you have, feeling empowered by Ishvara, you can fight. And if you can remember Ishvara in that way on a literal battlefield, then how about in your home, in your workplace, while you're driving? You get the point, that it is completely possible to maintain a continual awareness of your relationship with Ishvara throughout each and every day. That is what Sri Krishna taught way back in chapters 2 and 3 when he taught Karma Yoga, and he's referring to that here once again. Mamanusmara, remember me, yudhyacha, and engage in your fight. And he concludes this verse, Mayi, we have to break the words apart, Mayi arpita mano buddhihi, one whose manas, mind, and buddhi, intellect, are arpita, offered where? Mayi, Sri Krishna says, unto me. One whose mind and intellect are offered to me, one whose mind and intellect are fixed on me, one who appreciates their connectedness to Ishvara throughout the day. What about that person? Mam eva eshyasi asamshayaha. Actually, that's used as an adjective to Arjuna. Oh Arjuna, you should have your manas and buddhi, your mind and intellect. With your mind and intellect fixed on me, O Arjuna. Arjuna is addressed in the second half. You see that in the verb. The verb is cleverly hidden. Mam eva eshyasi. Eshyasi is a verb. You will reach. He addresses Arjuna. You will reach Mameva. You will reach me indeed. Asamshayaha, without any doubt whatsoever. You, Arjuna, if your mind and intellect are fixed on me, even while on the battlefield. And that's the take-home message. If Arjuna is able to keep his mind fixed on Ishvara while he's on the battlefield, then certainly you can keep your mind fixed on Ishvara while you're at home, while you're at work, while you're engaged in any activity. And again, it doesn't mean in a formal way. It doesn't mean you have to kind of imagine Ishvara or say a prayer, but it does mean to appreciate that you are constantly in relationship with Ishvara, because whatever you do with skills given by Ishvara, and whatever you receive in life, you receive from Ishvara's hands, so to speak. Enough said, that's all the topic of Karma Yoga. Now, before we proceed, this chapter, by the way, can be a very mystifying chapter, very confusing, because he suddenly, with the very next verse, we're going to see a detailed account of a particular meditation practice which is meant to be practiced at the end of your life, which can indeed lead you to Ishvara at the end of your life. That's going to be taught starting with the next verse, and now we have to reconcile that with what we've just seen. Because in this verse, Sri Krishna is talking about something you do all the time, right? Sarveshu kaleshu. And with the next verse, he's going to begin discussing something which is done at the end of your life. You get the idea that we actually have two different subject matters here. One is a practice you do throughout your life, and another is a practice for the end of your life. And it's crucial right now, before we proceed, that we understand these two things. So, what about remember, we had a long discussion in our last class that at the end of your life, you achieve a certain condition. Actually, should I wait on that? Yeah, let me finish, since I've started on this. This will make more sense as we continue, because, as I said, as we continue, Sri Krishna is going to teach a particular meditation technique which is intended to be performed at the end of your life. So knowing that we're going to discuss that, then what about if you don't know that technique, or if you can't practice that technique? We had a discussion in the last class about at the end of life, many people are properly treated with morphine because people can be very tense, agitated, anxious, afraid at the end of life. Morphine is a blessing for anyone who is dying. It helps them relax. It helps them die peacefully. The fact is, if you're full of morphine, your mind is going to be fuzzy. And if your mind is fuzzy, you're certainly not going to be ready to practice an intense meditation practice, and you'll see just how intense it is as we go along today. We'll see that today. So then, how are we to understand this idea of meditating at the end of your life? Well, if you really practice what Sri Krishna teaches here, you're going to be enlightened before you reach the end of your life. These teachings are very powerful. I have no doubt that any sincere person who is dedicated to these teachings can indeed reach enlightenment before the end of your life. Now, which means coming to the end, this is a very simple way of putting it. At the end of life, there are two kinds of people: those who are enlightened and those who are not. If you are enlightened at the end of your life, is there any need to perform a particular special meditation technique? Remember that not remember, because we haven't discussed it yet. We will see that this technique is meant to help those who are not yet enlightened reach enlightenment at the very end of their lives. So it's a special technique that can be performed at the very end of your life, whereby when you die, you reach Ishvara, perhaps by getting enlightened in your dying moments, or in some other way you reach Ishvara. Obviously, that's a technique for those who are not yet enlightened. One who is enlightened at the time of death, what do you need to do? Die. Sorry to be silly. There's nothing that needs to be done. You just surrender your body and mind to Ishvara, and your body ceases to function. Your mind and subtle body enter a state of dissolution. And what happens to the consciousness, which is your true fundamental nature? At the moment of death, what happens to your fundamental self, nature, as Satchidananda Atma? And the answer, as you know, is nothing happens. You remain exactly who you already are as Satchidananda Atma. What is the difference? Right now, we're not, pardon me for saying this, we're not quite dead yet. We're working on it. We'll see. We're working on it. We'll get there. So right now, while we're not quite dead, if you are fully enlightened, the presence of your body and mind creates an experience of being individual. I'm choosing my words very carefully now. For an enlightened person, the presence of a body and mind creates the experience of being an individual. But as we've discussed many times, experiences are not always real, accurate. You experience the sun going down each evening. The sun doesn't go down, the earth turns on its axis. You experience the blue sky. Air isn't blue, space is black. But you experience, the point I'm making, it's a topic we've discussed many times before, is experience is just experience. It's not truth. It's just what you happen to experience. So an enlightened person experiences the body and mind and experiences a sense of individuality. An enlightened person knows that the experience is false. An enlightened person knows that as Satchidananda Atma, they are already non-separate from Brahman. An enlightened person is not fooled by the experience of body and mind. The reason I'm bringing this to your attention is this. At the moment of death, for an enlightened person, this experience of individuality comes to an end. Already, they're in their essential nature, as Satchidananda Atma, as that true inner self, is already non-separate from Ishvara, from Brahman, I should say. But that experience of being an individual, the little trace of separateness, a little hint of separateness remains as long as the body remains. When that body goes away, any last trace of separateness or individuality is gone. The enlightened person remains utterly non-separate from Brahman without any experience that can cause the feeling of separation or individuality. That's for the enlightened person. So the enlightened person then does not need to perform any kind of meditation at the time of death. And the enlightened person is enlightened at the end of their life by following these teachings, by doing exactly what Sri Krishna says here. Sarveshu kaleshu, at all times, mam anusmara, think of me, meditate on me, reflect on me, yudhyacha, and be engaged in your daily activities. So through a lifelong practice of sadhana, again, if you're following these teachings properly, you will reach the end of your life being enlightened, and there's no need to perform any kind of meditation practice. But what if you're in that other category? Those who are not yet enlightened at the end of their lives? Well, among them, there are two categories. So we have two categories, enlightened, non-enlightened. Then among those who are non-enlightened, there are two categories. Those who are great meditators, great yogis, and those who are not great meditators, not yogis. So if you reach the end of your life and you're not enlightened and you're not a great yogi, okay, get ready for rebirth. Some other life will take place and you will continue to exhaust your karmas. But if you reach the end of your life, you're not yet enlightened, but you are an experienced meditator. Sri Krishna has a technique for you. That technique is going to be taught here. Let's see that. This explanation, by the way, was really needed. Otherwise, I think it is very confusing. So let's proceed. Abhyasa yoga yuktena, abhyasa yoga yuktena, chetasananya gamina, paramam purusham divyam, yati partanu chintayan. Okay, start at the last line. And remember, previous verse, Sri Krishna is talking about one who has meditated on Sri Krishna their whole life. And let us presume they reach the end of their lives being enlightened. Now we're going to talk about those who are not yet enlightened. And that person, in the last line, that person, yati partha, O Arjuna, son of Kunti Arjuna, yati, that person can reach what? Third line, paramam divyam purusham. The paramam, supreme, divyam, divine, purusham, being. That person can reach the supreme divine being, ultimately Brahman. That person can, Brahman, to reach Brahman is to be enlightened. He says, yati paramam purusham divyam, that person can reach Brahman, meaning that person can gain enlightenment. How? Anuchintayan, the last word of the verse. Anuchintayan is by thinking about, and thinking about in the context of this chapter means meditating. So everything now we're going to see for a while is all on meditation. So anuchintayan here means meditating. By meditating, that person can become enlightened at the end of their life. What kind of meditation? Go up to the top line. What kind of meditation? Abhyasa yoga yuktena. If they are yukta, endowed with yoga, a meditative practice, abhyasa yoga, the meditative practice of abhyasa meditation. You might remember that Sri Krishna talked about abhyasa yoga in chapter 6. When he taught meditation, he used this word abhyasa to describe your ongoing effort in meditation, a continued ongoing effort, willful effort in meditation, Sri Krishna called abhyasa yoga. So through the practice of meditation, abhyasa yoga yuktena, by being endowed with that practice, engaged would be better, by being engaged in the practice of meditation, as taught by Sri Krishna in chapter 6, chetasa, with your mind, chetas, with your mind. What kind of mind? Na anyagamina chetasa. A mind which na does not, anyagamin, doesn't go anywhere else. A mind that doesn't wander. A mind that is perfectly fixed. And fixed on what? Paramam Purusham Divyam. Fixed on Brahman. Remember now, we're talking about at the end of life, to have a mind that doesn't wander. We're not talking about an ordinary situation. We're talking about an extraordinary situation with an extraordinary meditator, a great yogi at the end of life who is able to concentrate his or her mind so with such focus, to concentrate your mind on Brahman in your last moments. And as we discussed in our last class, what do we know about our last moments? We can't plan ahead. We have no idea what our last moments will be. So this is a unique situation, a special situation, a great yogi who is able to concentrate one's attention at the end of life, concentrate one's attention on Brahman. And then we get that dramatic change of meter. And the dramatic change of meter is trying to give you kind of the feeling of what it is to meditate on Brahman in your dying moments. It's meant to be very, very dramatic. And it is very dramatic. Let's see it right now. Kavim Purana Manushasitaram Kavim Purana Manushasitaram Anoraniyam Samanusmaretyaha Anoraniyam Samanusmaretyaha Sarvasya Dhataram Achintya Rupam Sarvasya Dhataram Achintya Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasaf Parastat Aditya Varnam Tamasaf Parastat. Second line at the end, can you see Anu Smaret Yaha? Yaha, one who, Anu Smaret. And there's that verb to remember again. But we're not talking about remembering. We're talking about meditation. Sri Krishna uses that verb in the sense of meditate. Yaha anusmaret, one who meditates. One who meditates on what? And the rest of the verse is this lofty poetry that describes Brahman as that which you meditate upon in your dying moments. What kind of Brahman? Brahman described as kavim, not poets, not here. So kavim also, the technical definition, kranta darshi, which you could translate as omniscient. Yes, kavim can mean poet, doesn't mean poet here. It means omniscient. So omniscient, Puranam, ancient, unborn, uncreated. Anushasitaram, the one because of whom everything else functions. Like the master of the universe, master of the cosmos. The one who is anoho aniyamsam. The one who is aniyamsam, more subtle, anoho than subtle. More subtle than subtle. Subtle means imperceptible. Space is imperceptible. You can't see it, hear it, smell it, grasp it, you get the point. Space is imperceptible. Space is subtle. Brahman is more subtle than that. more imperceptible than the imperceptible. Also, that Brahman is sarvasya dhataram, the one who establishes sarvasya, everything, the creator of all, the establisher of all, the root cause of all that exists, the one who is achintya rupam, the one whose form, rupam, is achintya, inconceivable. The one who has an inconceivable form. You can imagine Ishvara with many forms. You cannot imagine Brahman with many forms, because Brahman is nirguna, no qualities, no forms, no attributes. And just lovely poetry here. That Brahman here is Aditya Varnam, has the color of the sun. Now, color of the sun, not yellow. Color of the sun meaning shining. And shining not like light. We just said imperceivable. You can perceive light, so you can't take it literally as light. So that which is Aditya Varnam, shining like the sun, means consciousness. We use this metaphor so often. Shining like consciousness. Why do we use that metaphor? Just like the sun reveals what's happening around you, in the same way consciousness reveals what's happening in your mind, what's happening inside. Based on this, we use this metaphor all the time. Consciousness is compared to light because consciousness reveals. And just like the sun reveals everything, consciousness reveals everything. From our prior discussions, you remember, one all-pervasive consciousness revealing the activities of your mind, your mind, your mind, my mind, every mind, one all-pervasive consciousness revealing the activities in every mind. Aditya Varnam. And the one who is tamasaha parastat, the one who is parastat, beyond tamasaha, darkness, beyond darkness, poetry, shining beyond darkness. Even without going deeply into the meaning, the poetry is just delightful. And it continues. Prayana kale manasachalena, prayana kale manasachalena, bhaktya yukto yoga balena chaiva, bhaktya yukto yoga balena chaiva, Bhruvor madhye pranamaveshya samyaka, Bhruvor madhye pranamaveshya samyaka, Satam param purushamupaiti divyam, Satam param purushamupaiti divyam. You might notice an extra syllable snuck into that last line. Instead of having 11 syllables, it has 12. So there's a little hitch, as it were, in the recitation. Okay. Prayana kale makes it very clear. Kale, at the time of prayana, traveling on. So we're talking about at the time of death. Prior verse says anusmaret, meditating. Meditating when? Prayana kale, at the time of death. Meditating. How? Manasa, with your mind. What kind of mind? Achalena manasa, with a mind which is achala, fixed, firm, concentrated. What a gift to die with that mind being bright and clear and focused. We have no idea. To be honest, I doubt very much that will be my condition at the time of death. If I die accidentally, remember my dung beetle example. So that's one thing. And if I die at the end of disease, I hope I'm medicated with morphine because I want to be relaxed and peaceful when I pass away. But I'm telling you. So please give me that shot of morphine. I want to be peaceful at the time of death. But with that morphine, I guarantee you I'm not going to be performing this meditation. And that's okay, right? As we said, if you're enlightened at the end of your life, it doesn't make any difference. Okay, so prayana kale, at the time of death, manasa achalena, with a concentrated mind, bhaktya, with devotion, a mind full of devotion, bhaktya yuktaha, one who is endowed with great devotion, and one who is not only endowed with great devotion, yuktaha, also endowed with yoga balena, yoga bala, the strength of yoga. The strength of yoga means through a lifelong practice of meditation, your mind we're talking about a great yogi here, a great meditator. That great yogi at the end of life will be endowed with yoga bala, with that strength of yogic practice. And with that strength of yogic practice, that yogi can manage to concentrate his or her attention at the end of life. Concentrate the attention how? Further instructions. Bhruvoho madhye pranam aveshya samyaka. Pranam, your life force. So now the life force is what's going to leave your body at the end of life. So prior to the prana leaving the body, the great yogi here is instructed, pranam aveshya, to place your prana samyak, properly, bhruvoho madhye, bhruva. Actually, bhruva is one. Bhruvoho is two. Bhruvoho madhye, between the eyebrows. Placing your prana properly between the eyebrows at the end of your life. How do you place your prana? We're talking about a great yogi here, who through a lifelong practice of meditation has learned to manipulate their prana and have the ability. There are lots of obscure texts that talk about manipulating your prana and moving it up and down the spinal column from one chakra to another chakra to another chakra. This is an advanced meditation practice, a practice done by this great yogi at the end, who has practiced this throughout the life. And that great yogi, saha, that great yogi, upayati, in the middle of the last line, that great yogi, upayati, reaches tam param divyam purusham. That great yogi reaches tam, that, param, supreme, divyam, divine, purusham, being. That great yogi reaches Brahman at the end of one's life through this amazing practice of meditation, which is meant to be performed in your dying moments, quite seriously. Then, one more verse in this dramatic meter. Yadaksharam veda vido varanti, yadaksharam veda vido varanti, vishanti yadyatayo vitaragaha, vishanti yadyatayo vitaragaha, yadichanto brahmacharyam charanti, yadichanto brahmacharyam charanti, tatte param sangrahena pravakshe, tatte param sangrahena pravakshe. Here in this verse, let me just give you the summary meaning. It'll make it more clear. Sri Krishna defines a goal, the goal that he talked about in a prior verse, reaching Brahman. That goal is sought after by three different groups of people. This is the nature of the verse. So that goal, discussed in the prior verse, the goal of reaching Brahman, that goal is sought after by three different groups of people. In this verse, Sri Krishna says, Yadaksharam, that, Veda Vidaha Vadanti. Vedavit is one who knows the Vedas, and he's referring here to the ancient rishis from whom the Vedas come. So Veda Vidaha, plural, those who know the Vedas, but more specifically those ancient rishis, Vadanti, they declared this goal that we're talking about, the goal described, reaching Brahman, the goal described in a prior verse. They declared it, Yat Aksharam, that immutable, unchanging, timeless goal. So the ancient rishis declared that goal. Also, in the second line middle, do you see yatayo? Yati literally means one who strives. Yatayaha is plural, those who strive. Those who strive, this term yati is often used to mean sannyasi. And here in this context, it does mean sannyasi, one who takes to the life of sannyasa, the one who renounces worldly life and commits himself or herself exclusively to spiritual pursuits. So yatayaha, those sannyasis who are vitaragaha, who have overcome raga and dvesha, who are free from desires. What about them? Vishanti yat. That word yat comes again and again, representing that goal. So that goal which vishanti, they reach. So those sannyasis reach that goal. First line, the rishis describe the goal. Second line, the sannyasis reach the goal. Third line are talking about students who ichhantaha yat, they desire that goal. And who are those that desire the goal? The ones who brahmacharyam charanti, the ones who live a life of brahmacharyam, a life of chastity, if you want to be very literal, but he's referring to students, those who are studying the Vedas, those who are studying Vedanta, aspiring to reach the goal. So notice the series of three. First, the rishis who describe that goal of reaching Brahman. Second, the yatis, the sannyasis who enter into that goal, which is Brahman. And third, the brahmacharis, the students who ichhantaha, are desiring that goal. What about that goal? Tat param, in the last line, tat param, that goal, te, unto you, Arjuna, sangrahena, in brief, pravakshye, I will tell you. I will tell you that goal in brief, the goal which was described by the rishis, the goal which was entered into by the sannyasis, the goal which is desired by students. Now, actually, before describing the goal, we're going to see in two verses a restatement of the meditation practice by which you reach the goal. So he is going to describe the goal after two more verses. These two verses are going to summarize and restate the special meditation practice to be engaged in by that great yogi in one's dying moments. And Sri Krishna is going to enumerate 6 different steps. This is definitely a technique to be done by a great yogi and not by an ordinary person. Again, what's the problem? If you're an ordinary person and not a great yogi, that's okay. Just follow Sri Krishna's teachings here. You will be enlightened at the end of your life. And you don't need the practice. this. That's a very important point. Okay, let's see. Sri Krishna's enumeration of the steps of practice for the great yogi. So, and we're back now to the ordinary meter. Sarvadvarani samyamya, sarvadvarani samyamya, mano hridi nirudhya cha, mano hridi nirudhya cha, murdhyadhayatmana pranam, murdhyadhayatmana pranam, astato yoga dharanam, astato yoga dharanam. So Shri Krishna says, what are the steps? And remember, these are steps to be done in your final moments. And I think only a great yogi can do that. So what is the first step? Sarvadvarani samyamya. Samyamya, controlling, withdrawing. Sarva dwara. Dwara, doorway. Doorway to the world. All the doorways to the world means your five senses. Your sense of sight is a doorway to the world. Your sense of hearing is a doorway to the world. Taste, smell, and touch. So all the doorways to the world, all your senses, samyamya, withdrawing them. Step one. Step two, mano hridi nirudhya cha. Manas, your mind, nirudhya, withdrawing your mind, controlling your mind, placing your mind, hridi, in your heart. Withdrawing your mind and placing it in your heart means absorbing your mind within. Making your mind absorb, talking about a state of samadhi. How great a yogi would you have to be to pull this off in your dying moments? I guarantee you, I've meditated for 30 plus years. I won't be able to do this. It's that demanding a technique. So concentrating your mind, withdrawing your mind, placing it in your heart, withdrawing into a state of samadhi, then breaking the words apart for you, murdni adhaya atmanaha pranam. Atmanaha pranam. Here Atma is not Satchidananda Atma. It simply means one's own. Atmanaha pranam, your own prana, life force. Prior we said that you're supposed to place the life force where? Bhruvoho madhye, between your eyebrows. Now we're getting a little bit more advanced. So Sri Krishna says here, Atmana pranam adhaya, placing your prana not between your eyebrows, but murdni, at the top of your head. In yogic terminology, they call it brahmarandhra, the spot where the prana is said to exit your body at the end of life. So the prana is said to travel up and down through the nadis of the spinal column, and that prana is then said to travel up through those nadis and exit through the top of your head. And here he says, pranam adhaya, placing your prana, murdni, at the top of your skull, preparing for the exit. And astitaha, remaining, yoga dharanam, the fourth step, if we want to list them. So astitaha, remaining, yoga dharanam, in a state of concentration. Dharana is yogic concentration. So remaining in a state of yogic concentration. The remaining steps are in the following verse. Omityekaksharam brahma, omityekaksharam brahma, vyaharan mamanusmaran, vyaharan mamanusmaram, yah prayati tyajandeham, yah prayati tyajandeham, sayati paramam gatim, sayati paramam gatim. So next up, fifth if you're counting, Om iti, breaking the words apart for you, Om iti eka aksharam brahma vyaharan. Vyaharan, uttering. Now uttering what? Om iti, uttering Om. And vyaharan actually suggests out loud. I'm not sure if it's necessarily out loud, but the word vyaharan suggests uttering Om out loud. What kind of Om? Om which is eka aksharam Brahma. Nice expression. Brahman in the form of one syllable. If you want to represent Brahman with one syllable, the syllable you will choose is Om. So Om is a one-syllable mantra that represents Brahman. So uttering Om in your final moments, and the symbolism is very powerful here. Because in Om, and the symbolism comes from the Mandukya Upanishad, Om is broken up symbolically into three parts, A, U, and Ma. And the A represents the waking state, U represents the dream state, Ma represents deep sleep. So therefore, A, U, Ma represents your worldly experience, waking, dream, and deep sleep. When you utter Om, that represents waking, dream, sleep, represents your experience. But the important part of the symbolism is what comes next, because after you utter Om, imagine this great yogi with his or her dying breath, uttering Om. That Om is an exhalation, the last exhalation, and the Om is followed by what? Somebody correctly said, silence. And that's what's taught in the Mandukya Upanishad. And this is the powerful symbolism of Om. So A-U-Ma, representing your life of experience, waking, dream, and sleep, concluding with silence. So with that last breath, the yogi utters Om and passes from a life of experience into silence. Of course, that silence is Brahman. So Om has not just A-U-Ma, Om includes, they call it Ardha Matra, the half syllable. Om includes the silence after Om. So Om doesn't come to an end with Om continues. Think about it. Om continues. Om. After Ma comes to an end, silence continues. Brahman is present in A-U-Ma. Brahman is present in silence. A-U-Ma comes to an end. The silence doesn't come to an end. The silence continues. Lovely metaphor. Nice the symbolism. So vyaharan, uttering with your final breath, Om iti, that ekaksharam Brahma, that Brahman in one syllable. And the last step, not surprisingly, Mam anusmaran, meditating on me. And here again, anusmaran, not in a sense of remembering, in the sense of meditating. Mam, on me, meditating on me with your final breath, uttering Om. Yaha, that great yogi, tyajan deham, giving up the body, prayati, travels on, the prana leaves the Brahmarandra, that the prana leaves the physical body, and saha, that great yogi, yati, reaches paramam gatim, the ultimate goal. That yogi reaches Brahman. Now, very powerfully, Sri Krishna explains this process of meditation to be done in your dying moments. And I think you get the sense, I've communicated it quite strongly, and that is, this is not an ordinary meditation practice. This is a meditation practice to be performed by a great yogi in one's dying moments. And if you are incapable of doing this kind of practice in your dying moments, who cares? It's okay, because the alternative to this is following these teachings and reaching enlightenment while you're still alive. Then you reach the end of your life. We'll conclude with this verse, so just a few final comments here. So it's perhaps very sad that so many people reach the end of their lives with regrets. I wish I would have done this, I wish that. You know that people feel like that. Not everyone. Some people feel certain regrets at the end of life. And that's very sad. How wonderful it is, however, if you've lived a life of spiritual growth, if you've followed these teachings, and you reach the end of your life with a sense of contentment and fulfillment, and a sense that this is the time to go. My life is used up. Vasanti knows this very well. I often use a very funny American metaphor of a toothpaste tube. So you go on using the toothpaste and rolling it up. You're supposed to roll it up. You know that, right? That's a rule. Make sure you roll up the bottom of your toothpaste tube. And so when you get to the end, you've used up every last bit of toothpaste. Wonderful. You throw that thing away. To me, and this, I know this sounds funny, but to me, that's a great metaphor for reaching the end of life. You've used up every last bit of your life. You're not wasting anything. You don't waste toothpaste. You're not supposed to. So just as you use up every last drop in that toothpaste tube, in the same way, you use up every last drop of life, and having reached that sense of completion, fulfillment, contentment, you're ready to let go of the body, to let go of the mind and senses, and remain as you are, utterly non-separate from Brahman. These are the final moments for an enlightened person. Much easier than this yogic practice. Just let go in your final moments, knowing that you are utterly non-separate from Brahman. Okay, we'll conclude our class here. There's more we'll see in our next class, and we'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinamupamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.